From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. It's the trial that gripped Australia and made waves around the world. It's the story of a family lunch in a small hamlet in southern Australia that somehow ended with 3 people dead and 1 in a critical condition.
Can you tell us about the meal that you cooked? Can you tell us where the mushrooms came from?
Did Erin Patterson, a middle-aged mother and a keen cook, deliberately feed her guests deadly mushrooms? Or was this a terrible accident? After 7 days of deliberation, the jury came back with its verdict.
We are about to find out whether Erin Patterson is guilty or not guilty of triple murder and attempted murder.
We've just been told that the jury is back in the courtroom. No other family members in yet. Erin is staring straight ahead. She's in the room wearing a paisley top. Her hair is down as per usual.
We've got the first verdicts now.
I can let you know that Erin Patterson has been found guilty on all charges, guilty of the murders of Don and Gal Patterson and Heather Wilkinson, and guilty of the attempted murder of Pastor Ian Wilkinson. We've been told that Erin Patterson is breathing very deeply. She's been watching the jury now. She's been blinking a lot, but wow, what an extraordinary result for a trial that has been anything but ordinary from the very, very beginning.
What do we now know about how and why Erin Patterson killed her relatives? The story today: the mushroom murders.
My name is Bernard Lagan. I'm the Australia correspondent for The Times. I'm based in Sydney.
Bernard, you've been following this astonishing trial very closely. Just take us back to where it all begins. So take us back to the 29th of July, 2023. Firstly, where did it all happen?
So Erin Patterson on that day invited 4 of her elderly relatives to lunch at her home in a tiny village called Leongatha, which is about 100 miles southeast of Melbourne in a rural area. It's coal country and dairy farming country. Erin Patterson's house is a large wooden 2-storey house, only recently built. She inherited quite a lot of money from her deceased parents and was able to build a new house several years ago. And she hosted a lunch in this house. She invited the parents of her estranged husband, Simon Patterson. They were Don and Gail Patterson. They were both age 70 at the time. And Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, also attended, along with her husband, Ian Wilkinson, who was, or still is, the Baptist pastor in this area in the nearby town of Correspondent. Now, the Baptist Church linked everybody in this story. Erin Patterson was in the congregation, as were Don and Gail Patterson, her in-laws. Ian Wilkinson was the pastor, and Simon Patterson, Erin's estranged husband, was also in the congregation. I might add at this point that Simon Patterson was also asked to attend this lunch. He pulled out the evening before, saying he was uncomfortable about attending. So he didn't go.
Before we get on to that lunch, just tell us a bit about Erin Patterson. I mean, for people who met her before that day, what sort of a woman were they meeting?
So Erin Patterson was originally from Melbourne, and she met Simon around about 15 years ago. He was a traffic engineer working for a local council in Morwell, which is close to where Erin lives now, in south of Melbourne. Erin did a university degree, I think, in English history, and then changed careers and trained as an air traffic controller. And she did become an air traffic controller for a period in Melbourne. They got together, had a child, and then they moved all the way across the country to Western Australia, where they bought a four-wheel drive vehicle and do what a lot of younger couples do. They travelled across the outback for a few months in this vehicle camping. When that trip was over, they briefly opened a bookshop in Western Australia near Perth before they returned to to the region where Erin's now living. So she had quite a colourful past, you might say. Those that know her have said that she could be quick to anger, that she didn't leave people in any doubt about what she thought. She did take the witness stand for 8 days during her trial. That was unexpected, but she took the stand and she told quite a bit about some of the trials in her life, most notably that she had battled weight problems and problems of self-image for much of her life, and that had made her at times very unhappy.
So clearly something had gone wrong in the marriage by this stage. The husband and wife were estranged. Take us back to that day, to that lunch. So she's invited people over, her in-laws, her husband. Her husband hasn't come. What happens?
We have to go back a bit to why she invited everybody to the lunch. Everyone at that lunch, her guests, said the invitation was unexpected and they were a bit unsure about why they would be asked. It's not as though Erin and her in-laws and relatives weren't talking, but things had been strange in the lead up to the lunch because of Erin's own marital difficulties. She had split with Simon, but there were issues surrounding Simon's ability or willingness to pay for some of the medical treatment required by the children. And Erin, we know from her evidence in court, had tried to get her relatives to intervene on some of these issues to talk to Simon. But the relatives had made clear to Erin before the lunch that they did not wish to become involved in those issues. They were happy to offer her some advice at times, but they didn't want to become people who negotiated between her and Simon. So there were some tensions there. Erin has given a couple of explanations for inviting everybody to the lunch. She has maintained that she wanted to build family ties, to strengthen family ties, so that was one of the reasons. But at the lunch, she gave the impression, as much told her relatives, that she had been diagnosed with cancer.
Wow.
Which turned out not to be true.
Oh. Did she believe she was?
She had been Googling some conditions she had, and she thought she might be suffering from cancer, but she had not been diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
At all. Secondly, she said that another reason for the lunch was that she was going to enter hospital for gastric bypass surgery, that is weight reduction surgery, and she wanted to tell the relatives about this so that they could help take care of her children while she was undergoing this procedure. But she's also admitted now that she indeed was not booked in for any gastric bypass surgery, and the treatment centre of which she claimed to her relatives where she was booked in does no such thing. So when she was asked about that in court, she said, oh, well, she didn't realise that, and it puzzled her that she got that wrong. So in summary, it appears Erin was looking for a degree of sympathy from her relatives at that lunch, which she has admitted herself to be the case.
Mm. So she's assembled these slightly estranged relatives in order to gain sympathy on false pretenses. What is lunch like? What is she cooking for a start?
The meal she had prepared was beef Wellington.
Popular choice.
Yeah, and she had procured mushrooms to put in this meal. She claimed the mushrooms were purchased from a supermarket in her hometown and also from an unidentified Asian grocery store in Melbourne. Now, I might say at this point that health authorities have never located the grocery store which Erin says she purchased these mushrooms from.
Ah.
Now, of course, I may be jumping ahead of things here, but the mushrooms are crucial to this because in the days immediately after the lunch, everybody but Erin fell very, very gravely ill. Don Patterson and his wife, Gail, both died, as did Heather Wilkinson. All were dead within a week of the lunch, and they had died of severe liver failure. Erin Patterson claimed to be feeling ill, and she was obviously checked out by doctors who were very concerned that she had been poisoned as well, the same doctors who were trying to save her relatives. But there were no markers for poisoning in her body in the way that there were for her relatives.
Even though she'd eaten lunch with them.
Even though she'd eaten lunch with them. One of the key issues that has come up in this trial is what are alleged to be a series of lies told by Erin Patterson. Number one, she claimed that she had never foraged for wild mushrooms. That's what she told police in the early days after the lunch. She said she only procured the mushrooms from retail outlets. At her trial, she admitted that was wrong. She had indeed foraged for wild mushrooms, but she said only for non-toxic mushrooms. Then she went on to say she now accepted that there were lethal death cap mushrooms in the dish, and she believed she must have, by mistake, foraged those mushrooms, dried them, put them in a plastic container, and somehow, by accident, inserted them into the beef Wellington dish that she had cooked. So that was a pretty big admission from her at the time.
And as a result of this lunch, in the days that followed, everybody other than Erin Patterson was very sick, and it did actually lead to 3 deaths. Just tell us what we know about the death cap mushroom that seems to have caused them.
So the death cap mushroom grows only in southeastern Australia, and it tends to grow beneath oak trees. According to the expert evidence given at Erin's trial, it is a large and very distinctive mushroom that often has a yellow hue to it, but can be confused with non-toxic mushrooms by people who are not trained. It's well known that it grows in southeastern Australia, and there are various websites which serve as a warning to people. That is, when death cap mushrooms are sighted, their location is often posted as a warning. In other words, don't go there, there's death caps.
And just how toxic are they?
They're very, very toxic. If you eat death cap mushrooms, generally you die. They shut down the liver, which is what happened to the 3 people who died. By the morning after the lunch, all 3 were suffering from severe diarrhea and vomiting, and 2 of them were already in hospital. Don Patterson was not in hospital by then, but he was in hospital by early afternoon on the day after the lunch. And slowly, those 3, their conditions deteriorated, and they all died within days. And doctors had done toxicology tests on them and knew that they had been poisoned by mushrooms. And at that point, of course, Erin Patterson was summoned to the hospital because doctors were concerned that she and her children, who she alleged had eaten leftovers that night, had also been poisoned by the mushrooms. But there was no evidence that they had.
That is remarkable. She was arrested and the world has been transfixed by this trial. Having watched it so closely, just talk us through the prosecution's case. What was the evidence she was arrested on, and what was their argument for why they think that this was a deliberate crime and that she's guilty?
So the Crown alleges that Erin Patterson served her guests individual beef Wellingtons that she had deliberately laced with death cap mushrooms.
So this isn't one big beef Wellington that's being cut up.
No, they say that she made individual beef Wellingtons, each of which were laced with death cap mushrooms, at least the ones that were served to her 4 guests. They also allege she fabricated her claim of having cancer and also attempted to make it appear that she had also suffered death cap mushroom poisoning, and then also embarked on a sustained cover-up, to use their words, in the aftermath of the lunch.
What do we know about the cover-up?
Erin denied to police that she owned a food dehydrator because the police had become suspicious that she had used a food dehydrator to dry fresh foods such as mushrooms and preserve them. Erin Patterson denied to police that she owned a food dehydrator at all, but she was captured in the days after the lunch on CCTV dumping a food dehydrator at the local rubbish tip. And when she was confronted with that evidence, Erin Patterson said, yes, and I panicked after my relatives fell ill and decided to dump the dehydrator. And I might add at this point that at her trial, the police produced photographs taken on her phone by Erin before the lunch of mushrooms drying on the food dehydrator tray. And some of those mushrooms were identified by an expert witness from Monash University as death cap mushrooms.
Wow. And this is, as you say, after she had said she'd only served the mushrooms that she'd bought, not foraged.
Yes, that's right. And then, of course, in the course of the trial, she changed her story about foraging and said, yes, look, I did forage for mushrooms. She said that she had, during the pandemic lockdowns, which were very severe in the state of Victoria, she had taken to foraging for mushrooms. But she said she was confident when she was doing it that she was only foraging non-toxic mushrooms. She did say she has since come to accept that there were death cap mushrooms in the meal, and she now believes it possible that she mixed up non-toxic mushrooms with toxic mushrooms and put them into the meal by accident. Her contention is that, yes, there were death cap mushrooms in the meal, but it was all a tragic accident, which she never intended to happen.
Right.
There's a further aspect to this, which perhaps I should go into as well. The prosecution also called evidence that Erin had been monitoring websites which contain warnings about where death cap mushrooms had been found in Victoria, and that on 2 occasions, after those warnings went up, she was in the area the day after, or very soon after, the implication being that she was harvesting death caps. Now, the evidence for her presence there is from cell phone towers which recorded her phone at remote sites where very soon after death cap mushrooms had been reported. I should say here that that evidence is not completely firm, but nevertheless the prosecution did call as evidence and it was heard by the court.
So it really comes down to whether she deliberately placed these death cap mushrooms in the beef Wellingtons for her family, or whether this was a terrible accident and then a very clumsy cover-up that followed. I guess, is there any other evidence that she prepared their beef Wellingtons separately, that the food that she and her children were eating would be kept separate?
There's no specific evidence on that as far as I can tell. But what there is evidence is that the survivor, Ian Wilkinson, gave evidence that he recalled that the guests all ate off matching large grey plates, while Erin ate off a smaller orange plate. Now, the implication, of course, that the prosecution drew was that this was deliberate, that Erin had served her meal on a very distinctive plate so that she knew which was hers. The implication further being that her beef Wellington may not have had the lethal mushrooms in it. Erin denied in court those implications on two grounds. She says she didn't believe that she owned an orange plate. And secondly, she maintained that the guests served themselves from a plate containing the beef Wellingtons. So that was her answer to that.
Bernard, as you explained earlier, Erin Patterson did actually appear in court. She faced a few days of questions. Just describe that moment. How did she appear? How did she conduct herself in court?
At first, she was very composed and quite clinical in her answers. She gave precise answers. It is when she got to talking about her personal circumstances, her body image difficulties and her battles with the weight, that Erin became quite emotional. The only time she became really emotional in the witness box. She broke down a couple of times while answering questions about that. It's clear that she's had a long battle managing her weight, and she said she alluded to periods of anxiety and depression, that those issues had brought on for her in the past. So that was the point in her evidence where she revealed, I think, the most of herself.
And Bernard, how does the defence, how do her lawyers explain her actions? How do they explain, A, what happened at that lunch, but also, her very clumsy cover-up?
Well, the defence, first of all, maintained that, yes, this was a tragic accident, that she never intended for her relatives to die. She never intended to harm them in any way. She loved them, and they were very close to her children. On the lies that Erin told, starting with the dehydrator, her claim that she never owned a dehydrator until she was caught on CCTV dumping it into the local rubbish tip. The defence case is that Erin was in a panic at this stage, 3 or 4 days after the lunch. Her relatives were gravely ill and dying. Her husband had said to her, her estranged husband, she had met him at the hospital, and he had said to her, she claimed, "Did you use your dehydrator to kill my parents?"
Wow.
And she said that this had greatly unnerved her, and that was part of her reasoning for dumping the dehydrator. Now, I must add that Simon Patterson, when he gave evidence at the trial, he denied saying that. So that's left hanging a bit. We can't be sure that he said that.
And through the evidence in court, did you get a sense of a motive for why she might want to kill her in-laws?
The motive is really interesting, or the lack of motive is really interesting. The prosecution, right at the beginning of this trial, said they would not be putting forward a motive because they said there was no apparent motive that they could identify. Nevertheless, they did allude to the tensions between Erin and Simon and Erin's relatives over Simon's behaviour as a possible motive. They led evidence about those tensions, relying on Facebook chats of which Erin was a member, where she had disparaged Simon and disparaged her relatives. At one point, she put up a Facebook posting saying she's had enough of this shit in relation to her in-laws. So the prosecution used that as an illustration of motive without putting forward a formal motive. And indeed, the prosecution, at the end of the trial in their closing address, said one does not necessarily need a motive for a murder conviction. Now, of course, the defence made much of the fact that the prosecution had not put forward a motive, and the defence contended that Erin had no motive to harm her relatives. And I must say The judge, in his 4-day direction to the jury, which came at the end of the trial, he also spoke about the fact that the prosecution had not formally put forward a motive, and told the jury that would have to be a very important part of their deliberations.
During the course of the court case, we not only heard from her, as you pointed out earlier, her husband also took the stand, and so did their children. Did you get a sense from them of what family life had been like, or whether they thought their mother might have been guilty?
The evidence of the children was generally supportive of the mother, although her son in particular had different recollections about some of the detail. I mean, for instance, there was one day where the mother was running him to flying lessons immediately in the days after the lunch. Erin claims that she had to stop several times to run to the toilet because her diarrhea was very severe. The son's memory of that differed from his mother.
Bernard, the jury has found her guilty. What happens next? Do we have a sense of what the punishment will be?
Yes, we do. In Victoria, there is a standard sentence of 25 years in prison for murder. So one would expect that the court will sentence her to that sentence on each charge. So that would be 75 years if it's to be done that way. And then there is the charge of attempted murder also, which will carry a sentence of up to 15 years in Victoria. So there's no question that she will go to jail for a very long time. We have to be mindful here that Erin may appeal her conviction, and it's open for her to do that. And I'd have to say, I expect that she will appeal.
Bernard, this is a case that has gripped people around the world, really, just because the details are so extraordinary. The idea of this lunch prepared for family, no clear motive, and yet a series of deaths. Just give us a sense of how big a case it's become in Australia.
Well, look, the case has generated tremendous interest, as you say, not least because the way these people died is almost medieval. All the large newspapers in this country have been running daily blogs on the case. The town of Morwell, where the trial is being held, has been inundated. There are scores of reporters in town. There are true crime podcasters in town. Netflix is in town, as is Stan, which is Australia's largest commercial streaming platform. And though those big streaming platforms, Netflix and Stan, do not just have documentary makers in town, they also have lawyers travelling with their producers and reporters.
Wow. I mean, it's an extraordinary media circus.
Indeed it is. Erin Patterson's trial began in May in the town of Morwell, a town of 14,000 people. It has a small court complex. The public galleries of the court have been packed for the 40 days of Erin's trial. The media were allocated 6 seats every day, which were handed out by ballot. The court officials have also created a media overflow room, which seats another 80 reporters and podcasters within the court. So that gives you an idea of how many media are in town for the case.
I suspect the town of Morwell has never seen anything like this.
I'm sure they haven't. In fact, I think it's quite a long time since Morwell even had a murder trial, from what I can gather.
That was the Times Australia correspondent Bernard Lagan. And for all the latest on that case, head to thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Edith Rousselot. The executive producer was Molly Guinness, and sound design and theme composition were by Maula Seto. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.